Jump at the Boneyard, which, to this day, I always laugh when I hear the title. It was a title that I put on it almost as a half joke, and just somehow it stunk. It stunk. No, it stuck. Not necessarily stunk. But yeah, it was a script that I wrote very shortly after getting out of film school, and it was written at a time when sort of independent film was all the rage, and yeah, I specifically thought, well, let me write something that I know we can shoot on a very small budget, and that was always the plan. With all my friends at film school, we kind of started losing hope that we were ever going to find even the meager funds to get it made. And then this film that I made in film school had been going to different festivals. And I got a call one time in the middle of the night saying, congratulations, I had won the Ann Arbor Film Festival. And I think I even forgot that I had sent it. So it was one of those really great calls to get. And the person said, "Oh, you won $1,000, I think it was, which at that time was a big deal." And they said you should thank the benefactor of the award, and that happened to be Lawrence Kasdan. So, so I sent him a thank you, and I sent him, I think it was a videotape actually of my student film, and I told all my friends, "This is it. This is our entree to the big time." And then, 6 months went by, and I never heard from him. And then, we started to curse his name in in all sorts of respects. And then one day, I got a call from him saying he was shooting when I sent it, and that he had finally seen it, and he just, and he's a great guy, and he just said to me, good luck with everything. And I said, well, I want to make this feature. We can read it, and I could tell the last thing in the world he wanted to do was read it. So eventually he said, well, why don't you send it to me, and I'll have my sister read it, and if she likes it, I'll read it. And then it was like 2 weeks later, he actually flew me and my partner in the film, Lloyd Goldfine, out to LA, and it was one of those fantasy weeks where we had meetings with studio heads, and basically Larry was just saying, because he was about to get a film of his finance, he's like, why don't you give me a couple extra bucks, and I'll give you 2 movies for the price of one. And we were just off to the races from there. I have a younger brother and an older brother, and have had interesting relationships with both. And I just had a dream that my brother was breaking into my apartment to steal something. And at that time in New York, it was sort of at the apex of the crack epidemic, if you want to call it that. And my place had been broken into a few times, so it was constantly on my mind. And then, yeah, somewhere in the fight that happened after I caught my brother breaking into my apartment, I realized that I was both the younger brother and the older brother, and it just stuck with me. And I thought, well, because I have this visceral connection, this seems like a story I can write, and it just went from there. And if I remember, and it was going on like 25, 30 years ago, I wrote it very, very quickly. Tim, I didn't know Tim, and we were we had become, you know, probably based mostly on Lawrence Kasdan's recommendation, we've become a very hot script. And so a lot of actors wanted to do it, and a lot of them were auditioning for it. And then somewhere along the lines, somebody said, you know, this guy Tim Roth, he might be interested in coming to America and acting in films. And I think I went to see him in the Robert Altman film, Theo and Vincent, you know, where he played Van Gogh. And I thought, wow, this guy is great.
What are you actually doing to sell my paintings? You don't tell me what my job is! And don't you tell me there's no market for my work!
He didn't audition because he was awful at it. He's still awful at auditioning. But I did talk to him. I think he was shooting something in Australia. I talked to him on the phone. And I remember very distinctly, though I, you know, instantly liked him, I said, listen, I think I'm worried about you doing a New York accent. And he said, oh, yeah, it's going to be a big challenge.
I mean, first of all those years when you were wishing the old man was dead, then all those years when you never saw him, so might as well have been dead. Still, when you read about it here on the Stones, kind of a funny feeling, right? What would you do right now if you felt something on your shoe? You looked down, you saw the Boneyard boogeyman trying to crawl out of his grave.
No. And you know, 99.9% of actors would say, oh, no problem, I'm going to nail it, or, you know, they would even do a little of it for you over the phone. But the fact that he was so ballsy to say, yeah, we got a big problem, I thought, well, you know, even if the film's no good, at least I'll like, you know, dying on the hill with this guy. So I cast him, and I think I met him a month later, and yeah, we had some definite struggles during the making of the film, but I'm glad to say we're still friends to this day. I sent him a audio recording of all of my friends in the neighborhood where I lived, and I sent it to him, and I think he used it for years whenever he did a New York film. At least he told me he did. I was very worried about him pulling off, you know, this New York aura, and the more I worried about it, the more he worried about it, and so it kind of spun off into this bad blood between us. And I think you know, at different points in the shoot, we grew to respect each other. And then I do remember one time I got pissed at him, and he walked off the set, and I went down to tell him, you know, we're not done shooting, and we had this whole blow-up argument. And then what we heard was that there was, you know, a PA and a walkie-talkie telling the rest of the crew that we were fighting, but, you know, we might get over it. And once we knew the crew really enjoyed us fighting, I think we played up our fighting a little more. You know, I mean, and it was, again, I think because it felt like such a personal story to me, that even after shooting, I never wanted to talk to him again. And I went and I told Lawrence Kasdan this, and I remember it very clearly. Larry said to me, he said, well, you're an idiot. I said, why? He said, because Tim's a great actor, and you know, he's going to be working for years. Hopefully you're going to be working for years, and you're going to run into him. And what's the sense in having an enemy? You know, why don't you just go have a beer with the guy and, you know, say that it's what's done is done and move on. And then, yeah, I met Tim at a bar out here in LA, and we were both nervous. I think he was even nervous I was going to punch him. That's how bad it was. And it was the best thing I ever did, you know, or the best advice Larry could have given me, because we very quickly buried the hatchet, and I did start to understand that I could have been much more supportive, and given him much more positivity than I had. And then, yeah, like I said, we did another short film together. We tried to do a bunch of different projects together. And, whenever I do get to see him, there's a connection that we have. I mean, he was the star of my first film, and, I directed him in his first American production. And aside from that, he was just a real beautiful human being.
What is it? It's from a film called Jumpin' at the Boneyard, which is a Fox film with Lawrence Kasdan produced it, and it's about two brothers dealing with crack abuse in the Bronx. It's like the underbelly of society, which not a lot of people see. It's kind of not an easy film to watch. Most people are wriggling in their seats, but it was a good opportunity to work with some great actors and director.
Alexis came in and auditioned for me, and he was probably amongst the least famous people who auditioned or he wanted to do the film, because, like I said, we're having kind of a moment amongst Hollywood actors. And I just thought, this guy is so real and takes direction so well. And at that, I think when he auditioned for me, he was kind of living a bit rough. And he had, long hair, and he was scruffy, and just like it all seemed to come together. I think 3 days before the shoot, he came to New York, and for some reason, he had shaved off all his hair, and he was bleach blonde. So we had to get extensions put on him, and there was barely any hair to attach the extensions to, and but it all worked out. I haven't seen the film in quite a long time, but whenever I do see a little clip of it, I'm reminded what an incredible talent he was. I don't know who said it, but every film has its moment, and if you release it a year earlier or a year later, it might be a completely different story. But yeah, for whatever reason, the film very quickly came and went. I mean, we did, have some ardent fans, but I think we got I know we got a bad review in the New York Times. And back then, it was all like, once that happened, once you got a bad review there for an independent film, it was all over. So yeah. No, no, it was a lot of location scouting, but no, I mean, the Bronx, especially back then, I mean, it was much of it was burnt out. So I know once we knew we were going to make the film, I must have been in every neighborhood in the Bronx, and even some in my neighborhood in Inwood, scouting for best places to put scenes. And no, we might have thrown a brick aside that was, in front of the lens, but that was the extent of our set dressing. I mean, I remember wanting it to be, more than a shower. It's a kind of a scene of absolution and cleansing. And Alexis was such a goof. And I remember, particularly in that scene, I told the crew, don't laugh at any of his jokes, because, and they, they used to joke that I was a method director, that I was always, and it's true, because Tim was always, preferring to keep things light, but I wanted everything to be, sour and grim. because it maybe put me more in the head of what I was trying to get. But I remember the shower scene telling the whole crew, you know, just don't laugh at the jokes because Tim's not here today. He won't have any partner in crime. And I remember it being very effective. And also, like a very little known thing, there's a guy mopping up, if you remember. And that guy actually is still a friend of ours. And he was part of a drug rehab center, whose choir you actually see in the end credits. So, you know, having him there, and, you know, he had a couple years before, you know, had such a drug issue that he tried to commit suicide, you know, all of that, you know, having him to sort of talk to and bounce off of, you know, definitely added whatever effect that scene had. Yeah, well, when I started writing the movie, I thought, you know, since I've never used crack and not used, you know, much drugs in my life to begin with, I said I should really go find out what life is like, you know, for someone who's living on the street. So I went and I volunteered at this place called the Addict Rehabilitation Center, and, you know, it was mostly people who had just gotten out of jail or off the street, and must have been 98% black. And so everybody thought I was a cop. And so, you know, I said it was something I could do, and we actually started a theater program there, and we did it for many, many years, and yeah, so I got to know the center really well, and, you know, some of the people who were in the theater project were also in the choir, and so I asked them, you know, if they could be part of the film, because, you know, I did want, if there was going to be a ray of hope, I wanted it to, you know, to be from them, and yeah, so they sang at the end. Well, I remember Sundance very well, because, and this is probably a big scoop for you, because I don't think many people know this, but by the people who are running Sundance, they basically called our producer, Nina Sadowski, and they said, listen, you know, we think this film is great. We want to give it a big premiere outside of the competition. And she said, you know, do you want to do that? And I said, you know, I didn't know anything about festivals, and, you know, I was very, you know, very naive. And I said, no, I want to be in the competition. And they said, well, we can understand that, because we think, you know, it could very well win, you know, a bunch of awards. So yeah, so I actually didn't go for the opening of the festival, because I was nervous, and because, I don't know, I thought maybe the film will speak better for itself than I will. But by the time I landed, everything was Reservoir Dogs. You know, it was like in one weekend, independent films just completely flipped. And, you know, and that's why I say, you know, maybe if we had been in Sundance a year earlier, things could have been very different. But, you know, almost overnight, people were thinking, wow, independent films can be cool and hip and fun. And, you know, I mean, I think Reservoir Dogs is a great film. And, you know, and Tarantino's, you know, certainly made his mark on the cinematic landscape forever. But yeah, it was palpable, and we very much became a sideline film. I mean, funny enough, he didn't win any awards either. but yeah. So then, yeah, coming out of Sundance, there was the whole question: are we even going to get released? And then Larry Kasdan, you know, he made a big stink and saying, this film deserves to be seen. And, if he hadn't, it might not have ever seen the light of day, to be honest with you. Yeah, Sam, this was like probably the week before Sam became a huge star. And, the story I love to tell is I remember calling him and saying I wanted him to do the film. I think he only did a week, if I remember right. Maybe not even a week. He did like 3 or 4 days. And I remember he got $800 for it. And I remember he was so happy, he was like covering the phone, and he was telling his wife, because they were, they were, glad, I think, glad for the role and glad to have the money. And, now he probably makes 800 a minute, or, but no, and then, yeah, my first professional day directing, I was directing Sam Jackson. And like, even in the interim of me casting him and him being in the film, I can't remember the Spike Lee film where he really made his. But anyway, I was incredibly intimidated by him, and he enjoyed that I was intimidated by him. And I just remember the first note I gave him. And it's very easy for you to imagine too. He just kind of, and he's 9.5 feet tall, and he was looking down at me, and he was like, "So how you want me to say it, white boy?" He didn't say white boy, but that's what I heard. And then the second day, I just, for whatever reason, I grew a pair, and I said, "No, Sam, I think you should do this because of this." And immediately he became wonderful. I think, subconsciously or consciously, he thought, if this guy wants to say he's a director, I want him to prove it to me. And then, yeah, after that, we had a great time. And the other thing I distinctly remember is, he had a bad leg at the time, because he was in a subway incident. Like, he got dragged by a subway. And I remember everybody went to lunch, and we were shooting in that gym, and he picked up a basketball and made 17 consecutive free throws. And yeah, I said, this guy is something. It was a very difficult shoot for a lot. I mean, and much of it was my fault that it made it difficult. But I remember Alexis being so real and, so heartbreaking that I just thought it's all worth it, because selfishly speaking, a lot of times, at least for me, when I write a script, really all I want to do is hear somebody say the words and hear them say it feeling what I was feeling. And yeah, it doesn't happen often, just because, it's so hard to connect, something that you feel so deeply to another person.
I really need you to know that I'm to blame for what I've been doing. And you.
I remember, crouching 2 feet away from him at that door and just thinking, man, that's an echo of what I heard when I was writing it. And yeah, it's a very strange addiction to have. I actually haven't talked to enough writers to hear, because, it also, don't get me wrong, you can have a great sensation when somebody takes something that you thought was going to have a certain feeling and gives it a whole different spin. But, when somebody really connects in that way, makes you feel very much not alone. It's kind of funny that, you were talking about him being alone at those moments in the film. But yeah, that was something. And if I remember, the crew applauded. And, that was a real dyed-in-the-wool New York crew that didn't applaud much, but they applauded that time. But you know, his talent was very much underappreciated. I'm sure you know he died a couple years ago. But you know, and also I don't know if he ever really wanted to be a big star. You know, eventually, but yeah, he was something. He certainly was. He was such a fun, beautiful human being. Um, I remember, and a great artist. I actually, the last time I saw him was in LA at like a farmer's market. I just bumped into him. I was with my family, and he, you know, I hadn't seen him in years, and immediately he was cracking jokes, and he said, you know, can I draw a picture of your daughter? And he sat down, and he like in 15 minutes did this incredible portrait of my daughter Luann. And I know we kept it, but I can't find it. And I've torn through everything. I know one day I'm gonna. And his brother asked me if they could have it, and they certainly can. But I, for whatever reason, it's in some box somewhere that I can't discover. But yeah, you know, he was he was a great artist, and I do remember I asked him one time if he could draw a poster for another film I was working on, and he said sure. And when I went over to this little place he was staying in LA, and he opened the door, and you know, he was dressed as a woman with cleavage and everything. And you know, I love to present myself as this kind of liberal, seen it all guy, but I was completely speechless because not only was, you know, the star of my film a woman, but he was an incredibly attractive woman. Or she was, you know, whatever pronoun was appropriate at the time. But yeah, and you know, he loved the fact that I couldn't hide how you know, gobsmacked I was to see him that way. And yeah, I think that's part of what Alexis was, is he loved to get people to embrace their prejudices that they didn't want to admit they had. And yeah, I think that's a big part of his legacy.